Karen from Now We're Cooking. It's Tuesday and it's time for tips, tricks, and treats. In spite of the fact that it's 90 degrees in Albuquerque, it's fall. It's inching along towards fall, and I'm going to help it by making caramel apple bread. Those are flavors that just sound like fall to me, smell like fall, and taste like fall. This is a quick bread, and the sort of basic definition of a quick bread is that it does not use yeast. It uses baking powder or baking soda. So it still takes an hour to bake, but there's no rising time to it. Banana nut bread is a quick bread, zucchini bread, all those kind. And this is just a version of all of that. It makes a single loaf, which I really like. It calls for 2 eggs, so I'm just gonna beat them up a little bit. The other thing that's nice about this recipe is you can do it all in a bowl. You don't need a mixer. You could certainly put it in a mixer if you wanted to, but you don't have to. So I've got egg, I've got a quarter cup of brown sugar. I need a cup of white sugar. This is where you need a lot of measure cups. I also need a third of a cup sour cream or plain Greek yogurt. I'm using Greek yogurt because I always have that on hand. I don't always have sour cream, but either one give it a lovely result. And I also need some vegetable oil. No butter with this. Calls for a quarter cup of vegetable oil. That one I will. And this is, you'll hear the term neutral oil or unflavored oil, corn oil, canola oil, that type thing, not olive oil, because it has a flavor and it doesn't go with this. So you just want to get this stuff stirred up. When it gets too thick for my whisk, I'm going to switch to a silicone scraper and just make sure that everything is blended. And in spite of the fact that I use a brown sugar softener disc, it looks like my brown sugar has decided to lump a bit. So I'm gonna work on it, make sure there aren't any lumps in it. And if there are lumps, I'm just gonna pretend maybe it's an apple or something like that. To make this loaf a caramel loaf, there's a couple of things to do. There are such things as caramel bits. They're kind of like in the chocolate chip department. My regular grocery store did not have any, and I was not in a time element to go to more stores. So I had some, not craft caramels, but these bigger caramels that we sell, and I just chunked them up to make caramel bits. And then to gild the lily, I'm gonna put a caramel glaze. So that's where the caramel portion of this comes in. You can see there's a few sneaky little bits of brown sugar still. I'm just gonna stir them up, and as I say, if there's any that don't come apart, we're just gonna fake it. So I need flour. I need 1.5 cups of flour. Wait, pay attention, that one happens to be powdered sugar. That would be a very interesting recipe if I did it that way. Powdered sugar is for something else in a minute. I'm using my handy dandy scraper, and 1.5 cups is 3 1/2 cups, and that way I don't have to have even more measure cups out. It calls for baking soda, and it calls for cinnamon. So there's my flour. I need a teaspoon of baking soda. If you're not sure the age of your baking powder or baking soda, might be time to replace them, because they won't cause your dough to rise enough if they're old. So 2 teaspoons of cinnamon. And I'm not measuring as, just throwing it in there. And the one thing that I forgot to put in earlier is some vanilla. Calls for a teaspoon of vanilla, which is about like that. So stir this up. Get everything blended up. If I wanted to, I could add nutmeg, I could add some pumpkin pie spice, even though it's apple, just to give it a little bit more of that warm fall flavor. But I'm just going with cinnamon. So You need about a cup of chopped apple. The loaves I did earlier, I had one of the biggest apples I've ever seen, and a half of an apple was more than a cup. This was a fairly conventional size apple, and you can see it's even that is more than a cup, but that's okay. You don't want to put in 2 cups of apple, but if you put in a titch over, it's going to be just fine. And you want your apple peeled, and then you want it diced up in whatever fashion. Smaller pieces, but I wouldn't put it grated because then it would kind of disappear into your batter. And any kind of apple will do. Traditional apples for pie are things like Granny Smith's and that type. I buy all kinds of mystery apples at the store. I wouldn't use a Red Delicious just because they're a little on the not as crisp side, but if that's what you have in a recipe like this, it's going to be fine. So I've got my apple, and I've also got my chunked up caramels. I made a loaf without it, and this time I'm going with caramels and caramel sauce because why not? I chunked these up earlier and they're a little sticky to themselves. So I want to stir all this through, and then I just want to be sure that I didn't forget anything. I've got brown sugar, white sugar, yogurt, oil, eggs, flour, vanilla, baking soda, and then the apples, cinnamon, and caramel. So super easy batter. I'm not going to bake it now because it takes about an hour to bake. I will tell you that most all these recipes say bake for an hour. Do not set your timer for an hour and walk away and come back in an hour and hope for the best. I was using a conventional size, a 9x5 loaf pan. The one I used at home was a teeny bit bigger. In my oven, I sprayed the pan. You can spray it with baking spray. You can use parchment paper. We sell these really cool silicone slings that are the exact size of a loaf pan and have little arms that come out so you can lift it out. You want to prepare your pan in some fashion. Put your batter in it, put it in the oven. I set the timer for about 30 minutes, then I went and looked at it. A quick bread, one of the other things that almost always happens with a quick bread is that they crack along the top. And you want it to do that. You don't be panicking, oh, my bread cracked. It's supposed to do that. But what you're looking for is your bread to be brown, and when a toothpick is inserted in the center, it comes out clean. So I set my timer for 30 minutes, and at 30 minutes it was fairly brown, but it was not done. So what I do is I take a small piece of foil and I make a little tint like this and put it, I don't want it smushed down on it, but I just cover my pan a little bit, and that lets the bread continue to bake, but the top doesn't get burned. And it only took about 40 to 45 minutes on this one, not the full hour. And that's what I say, you know, depending on your oven, how hot or cold your oven is what you're gonna get. So this is the one that I did earlier. And then to show you the glaze, the glaze also takes no time at all, but it takes some cooling time. I always turn my bread out on a paper towel, and this one had caramel in it, and it looks like some little bits of caramel kind of stuck to the towel, but that's all right. So this has got apples and caramel. The glaze is 2 tablespoons of butter that you melt in a saucepan on the burner, and then you put a 1/4 cup of brown sugar, and you stir for about 2 minutes and let it boil. And then you add a tablespoon of milk and you let it boil some more. So what you get is this little bit of lovely glaze. And this is not like an icing. We're not gonna make a ton. I want some powdered sugar in here. And it takes about, I'm not paying that much. This time I'm using powdered sugar like I'm supposed to. They say a 1/2 cup. And this is my 1/4 cup twice. If I need to, I could set my pan in I could set this, I did this about a 1/2 hour ago, so it would cool down, because that's what I was looking for. If I needed to, I could set the whole thing in a pan of ice water, but I don't think I'm gonna need to. What I'm looking for is I want the powdered sugar to incorporate And if it's not as thin as I'd like it to be, I'm gonna add a little bit more milk. And this one is not quite as thin as I'm looking for. It's blending well, but it's more like something that I would smear on with a icing spatula as opposed to do as a glaze. So I'm gonna take some more milk. And I should be measuring, but I'm not. Tablespoon or so. Because I want it a little bit on the thinner side. The way I did it earlier was I put this mixture in a baggie and pretended that it was an icing bag. And I cut the tip off and I smeared it all over. And that was great. And I may end up doing that again. But I want everything to be mixed up. And I'm going to switch to a scraper now because I want to be sure that there's no little bits of powdered sugar or anything that I don't want. And this is a step you can glaze or not, but I figure if the operative word is caramel, we should be adding as much caramel flavor as we possibly can. So I'm going to blend this up, and then I do want to taste it and see if it tastes more like caramel than just sugar. No vanilla is in here, but you could, because vanilla makes everything taste a little better, in my opinion. But so let's see what we've got going here. When I was little, we made an icing like this, and the recipe called it panooch, easy panooch. Okay, I'm going to see what happens if I just pour. You can see the texture of it's pretty pourable at this point. I'm not going to use a bag. I'm just going to pour. And let's see how I do. I want to go back and forth a little bit. It's okay if it drips over. And then I'm going to go back the other direction. So it's going to end up almost covering the entire loaf. This would be fun to put in smaller loaf pans and give them away. A lot of quick bread recipes make 2 standard loaves, which makes 4 small loaves for the most part. I like this that it just does 1. The other thing that I do quite a bit, if I'm making a quick bread and I fill my loaf pan the 2/3 full where it should be, and I still have batter left over, I will use a small loaf pan, the 3x5 size, and bake a little teeny loaf. Because when you're using fruit and a small apple is not always a small apple, and pumpkin's not always the same. So there I have a very pretty loaf. And then I have a pretty loaf that I made earlier, and I will slice this pretty loaf and show you what it looks like on a plate.
It's over there.
And we had to test it earlier, and it was quite the tasty thing. This one just has the apples, does not have any little caramel bits. But you can see there's lovely bits of apple through it. It's a very moist bread, and I will make it again and again. So this is a quick bread called caramel apple bread. Helps you get in the season of fall. Helps you think that maybe we'll get cooler one of these days. So now we're cooking is at the northeast corner of Paseo del Norte in Wyoming. We are open Monday through Saturday from 11 to 4. If you need loaf pans or bread slings or apple equipment or measure cups or all the things for your fall baking, we're here to help you out. We'd love to see you come in. I thank you for watching, and be sure and try some caramel apple bread. See you next time. Bye now.